The calendar notification never came. I refreshed my inbox 3 times that Monday morning, watching other people's phones light up around me with the same meeting invite. Mandatory team realignment, 2 p.m. all staff. The subject line appeared on screens across the office, but my calendar remained stubbornly empty. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch, maybe the company's email system acting up again. But when I checked the conference room booking, I saw my name wasn't on the attendee list. Everyone else was there. Every single person in operations, from senior managers to junior coordinators. Everyone except me. My stomach twisted as understanding sank in. This wasn't an oversight. I wasn't invited because I wasn't meant to be there. People started gathering near the break room, voices low and urgent. I caught fragments of whispered conversations as I walked past to refill my water bottle. "Do you think it's layoffs?" someone murmured. Another person responded, "Has to be. Why else would they call it realignment?" Then someone glanced at me, and the conversation stopped abruptly. Their expressions shifted, a mixture of pity and discomfort. The sympathy looks multiplied as morning turned to afternoon. Coworkers who usually chatted easily with me suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. When Amanda from accounting passed my desk, she mouthed silently, "I'm sorry," before hurrying toward the elevator. Sorry for what, exactly? Sorry that I was being let go? Sorry that everyone knew before I did? Sorry that corporate courtesy had apparently died somewhere between the weekend and this particular Monday? The looks weren't subtle. They were the kind of expressions people wore at funerals, carefully composed faces that tried to convey empathy while maintaining distance. Nobody wanted to get too close to someone marked for elimination, as if job loss might be contagious. I'd seen this pattern before when the company had gone through restructuring last year. The people on the chopping block were treated like ghosts in their final days, visible but not quite real, existing in a strange liminal space between employed and unemployed. Now I was apparently one of those ghosts. The realization felt surreal, like watching a movie about someone else's life. This couldn't actually be happening. I'd been with the company for 6 years, maintained perfect performance reviews, never missed a deadline. Victor Langley, my manager, emerged from his office at 1:30, laptop tucked under his arm. He walked directly past my desk without acknowledging my presence. No instructions about covering anything while he was in the meeting. No reassuring words about what was happening. Not even eye contact. Just purposeful strides toward the conference room, his expression carefully neutral. The deliberate avoidance spoke louder than any announcement. Victor always stopped by before important meetings, usually with last-minute requests or questions about project status. His silence now was deafening. I watched him disappear down the hallway, wondering if I should feel angry or just resigned. 6 years of working under his management, and this was how it ended? Without even the courtesy of a private conversation first? My hands trembled slightly as I tried to focus on my computer screen. The spreadsheet in front of me blurred, numbers losing meaning. Was I supposed to just sit here and wait? Pack up my desk preemptively? Pretend everything was normal until security escorted me out? The lack of clear protocol for this situation felt almost worse than the rejection itself. By 2 o'clock, the office was nearly deserted. The conference room had swallowed everyone who mattered, leaving behind only the hum of computers and the distant sound of ventilation systems. I sat alone in operations, surrounded by empty chairs and abandoned coffee mugs. The silence pressed in from all sides, heavier than any noise could be. My desk felt like an island, isolated and exposed. Through the glass walls separating the conference room from the rest of the office, I could see people settling into chairs, opening notebooks, checking phones one last time before the meeting started. The room was packed, standing room only for some attendees. Whatever this realignment was, it involved everyone. Everyone except me. A rational part of my brain suggested I should leave. Go home with whatever dignity remained, avoid the humiliation of sitting here alone while my fate was decided elsewhere. But another part of me refused to move. If they were making decisions about my future, shouldn't I at least try to understand what was happening? I opened my notebook, the same one I'd filled with process documentation and project notes over the years. My handwriting stared back at me, thousands of hours of work condensed into pages of careful records. My name is Stella Price, and until that Monday afternoon, I'd been invisible in the best possible way. Not invisible because I was incompetent or uninvolved, but invisible because everything I touched worked smoothly enough that nobody had to think about it. I managed the client data integration systems, the backbone of how our operations department functioned. Every client interaction, every service request, every billing cycle flowed through systems I'd built and maintained. When new employees joined, I trained them on workflows I'd documented. When clients had complex technical questions, they were quietly routed to me. When quarterly reports needed verification, my spreadsheets provided the source data. But because everything functioned reliably, because crises were prevented rather than solved dramatically, my work faded into background infrastructure. Victor took credit for smooth operations during management meetings. Senior directors assumed the systems had always existed, that they were simply part of how the company operated. Nobody questioned who maintained the databases or why client satisfaction remained consistently high. I'd accepted this invisibility as the price of being good at my job. Better to be essential and unnoticed than visible and expendable. Now that philosophy seemed tragically miscalculated. Victor had once called me low maintenance during a team meeting, his tone suggesting it was a compliment. Stella just gets things done without constant oversight. Low maintenance employees are gold in operations. At the time, I'd smiled and nodded, pleased by what seemed like recognition. Now that phrase echoed differently. Low maintenance meant easy to overlook. It meant someone who didn't demand attention or resources. Someone who could be quietly removed without disrupting the visible dynamics of a team. The people who survived corporate restructuring weren't necessarily the most competent ones. They were the loudest, the most visible, the ones who made sure everyone knew about their contributions. They sent department-wide emails celebrating minor victories. They spoke up assertively in meetings. They cultivated relationships with executives. I'd done none of those things. I'd simply worked, documented, improved systems without fanfare. My performance reviews were always excellent, but excellent wasn't enough if nobody upstairs knew who you were. Victor knew, of course. He understood exactly what I contributed because he regularly took my analysis into executive meetings, presenting insights as his own. But that knowledge wouldn't save me. It might actually condemn me, making me redundant to his narrative. I made a decision in that quiet, empty office. I wouldn't pack up my desk. Wouldn't send farewell emails or clear out my drawers. If they wanted me gone, they'd have to tell me directly. I refused to make it easier by preemptively erasing myself. Instead, I opened my notebook to a fresh page and began writing. Not a resignation letter or a plea for reconsideration. Just documentation of everything currently in progress, every system dependency, every client relationship requiring attention. If this was truly the end, I'd leave with my professional integrity intact. A complete record of responsibilities they'd need to redistribute. The act of writing calmed my racing thoughts. Each line was concrete, factual, undeniable. Client database maintenance protocols. Integration system passwords and recovery procedures. Quarterly reporting timelines. Training documentation locations. The list grew longer, filling pages. Looking at it objectively, the scope was substantial. How had I been managing all of this alone? And more importantly, who did they think would handle it after I was gone? The question hung unanswered as I continued documenting, my pen moving steadily across the page while the clock ticked toward whatever verdict awaited. Through the glass walls, I watched the meeting begin. The CEO, Malcolm Torres, stood at the head of the conference table. He was a tall man with silver hair and an expression that rarely revealed emotion. People often described him as calculating but fair. He'd built the company from a small consulting firm into a regional operation with 200 employees. Everyone respected him, though most also feared him slightly. Malcolm gestured to someone in the front row, and the room fell silent. Even from this distance, I could sense the nervous energy. People shifted in chairs, exchanged glances, waited for the axe to fall. They all assumed they knew what was coming. Layoffs disguised as realignment, the corporate euphemism for making people expendable. I wondered how many of them had spent the weekend updating resumes, just in case. How many had nervous conversations with partners about finances and job searches. The thought was oddly comforting. I wasn't alone in feeling vulnerable, just alone in being excluded from hearing my fate directly. Malcolm began speaking, his voice too quiet to hear from where I sat today. But I watched faces in the room for clues. Some people looked confused. Others nodded along. Victor sat in the second row, his posture relaxed and confident. Then Malcolm said a name, loud enough for me to hear through the glass. Harrison Kemp. Harrison was a director in business development, someone I'd rarely interacted with directly. He was senior enough that I'd assumed he was untouchable in any restructuring. But Malcolm continued speaking, and Harrison's expression shifted from confident to uncertain. Around him, other faces registered surprise. This wasn't following the expected script. Murmurs rippled through the room, people whispering to neighbors. Malcolm raised his hand, calling for silence again. He said 2 more names, both senior managers I knew by reputation. Neither were people I'd expected to be vulnerable. Both had been with the company longer than me, had more visible profiles, had cultivated the kind of executive relationships I'd never bothered developing. Something was wrong. Not wrong for me necessarily, but wrong with everyone's assumptions about what this meeting meant. The atmosphere in the conference room was shifting, uncertainty replacing resignation. People who'd walked in expecting to comfort terminated colleagues now looked worried about their own positions. Victor's posture had stiffened slightly. His earlier confidence looked less secure. The realization hit me gradually, then all at once. This wasn't a firing list. Or rather, it was, but I wasn't on it. I'd been excluded from the meeting not because I was being terminated, but because I wasn't involved in whatever was being discussed. The pity looks from coworkers hadn't been about my impending termination. They'd assumed I was already gone, that my exclusion meant I'd been cut before the meeting even started. But that didn't make sense with what I was witnessing through the glass. If I'd been fired, why was the meeting continuing? Why were senior people looking increasingly uncomfortable? I stood up, moving closer to the glass wall for a better view. Malcolm was holding papers now, referencing them as he spoke. From this angle, I could see they were performance reports, the kind that tracked project outcomes and client satisfaction metrics. He pointed to specific sections, then looked directly at Victor. My manager straightened in his chair, clearly being asked something. Victor responded, but even from here, I could see his answer wasn't satisfying Malcolm. The CEO's expression hardened, skeptical. He asked another question, more pointed this time. Victor gestured vaguely, trying to explain something he clearly didn't fully understand. Because he didn't understand the details. I did. Victor's confidence was evaporating in real time. His earlier relaxation had transformed into rigid defensive posture. He answered Malcolm's questions, but his responses were surface level, lacking the specifics an operations manager should know. Malcolm's frown deepened with each inadequate answer. Around the room, people were beginning to understand that this meeting wasn't about layoffs at all. It was about accountability. About who actually did what, who understood the systems they claimed to manage, who deserved their positions and who'd been coasting on others' work. Malcolm asked Victor something about client data systems, and I saw my manager's face go pale. He couldn't explain them because he'd never actually worked with them. He'd simply taken my reports and presented them upstairs, trusting that I'd handle all technical aspects while he claimed strategic credit. Now, confronted with detailed questions he couldn't answer, his ignorance was becoming painfully obvious. The room watched in uncomfortable silence as their colleagues stumbled through explanations that satisfied no one. This was Victor's nightmare scenario, being publicly exposed as someone who understood less than his title suggested. Malcolm paused, looking around the room with an expression that suggested disappointment more than anger. Then he asked a question that made my heart stop. Can anyone here explain how the client integration system actually functions? Walk me through the data flow and quality controls. Silence. Complete, profound silence. 50 people in that room, and not one could answer. Because I wasn't there, and I was the only person who actually knew. I'd documented everything, written training materials, offered to teach others. But nobody had bothered to learn. They'd relied on me to handle it, assumed the knowledge wasn't important enough to acquire themselves. Now Malcolm was asking a fundamental question about core operations, and the entire leadership team sat mute. Victor cleared his throat. Stella Price manages those systems. She could walk you through the technical details. The sound of my name made me step back from the glass, suddenly self-conscious. Malcolm's expression didn't change. I'm aware. Which raises the question of why critical operational knowledge is concentrated in a single coordinator-level employee while multiple managers claim credit for smooth operations. The accusation hung in the air. Victor had no response. Neither did anyone else. Malcolm continued, his voice carrying clearly now. This integration system that nobody here can explain? It processes every client interaction we have. Stella built it 3 years ago and has been maintaining it ever since. According to her documentation, she also handles client escalations, trains new staff, and produces the data analysis that appears in management reports. He paused, letting that sink in. How many of you knew that? A few uncomfortable nods. Most people stared at the table. And yet, Malcolm continued, her title remains Operations Coordinator. Her salary hasn't increased in 2 years. Her contributions appear in reports under other people's names. He looked directly at Victor. Your last presentation to the board included client satisfaction analysis. Did you mention who produced that analysis? Victor's jaw clenched. The presentation represented team efforts. Meaning Stella's effort, which you presented as team accomplishment. Malcolm's tone was flat, factual. I pulled the metadata from those spreadsheets. Every formula, every data pull, every visualization was created by her. You added a title slide. The room was absolutely silent. People who'd pitied me that morning now couldn't meet each other's eyes. They were realizing, collectively, how badly they'd misjudged the situation. I wasn't the one being eliminated. I was the one they couldn't afford to lose. Malcolm set down his papers and addressed the room with cold precision. This meeting isn't about layoffs. It's about accountability. We're realigning organizational structure to reflect who actually does what. Some of you have been coasting on other people's work while collecting management premiums. That ends today. He picked up a different document. I've spent the past month reviewing project records, performance data, and email trails. The picture that emerged was troubling. We have coordinators doing director-level work while directors take credit. We have processes nobody understands because we've relied on 1 or 2 people to carry knowledge without acknowledgement. The implications were staggering. This wasn't reactive restructuring due to budget constraints. This was deliberate house cleaning based on evidence Malcolm had been gathering quietly. Some of you will be receiving new role definitions today, Malcolm continued. Others will be exiting the organization. The determining factor is whether your contribution matches your compensation and title. Harrison Kemp, the director named first, spoke up nervously. What determines contribution measurement? Malcolm's smile was thin. Documentation. Output. Client feedback. The things that matter more than confidence in meetings. It was a surgical dismantling of corporate theater, the performance many had mastered while doing minimal actual work. Malcolm turned his attention back to Victor. Walk me through your typical week. What do you personally handle versus delegate? Victor hesitated, clearly trying to frame his answer carefully. I oversee operations broadly. Set strategic direction, coordinate with other departments, ensure deliverables meet standards. Specifically, Malcolm pressed. What did you personally do last week? Another pause. I reviewed Stella's client reports, attended the planning meeting with business development, responded to several emails regarding upcoming projects. You reviewed reports, Malcolm repeated. Did you create any analysis yourself? I supervised the analysis process. Meaning you waited for Stella to produce the analysis, then presented it. Victor's face reddened. Operations management requires delegation. It requires understanding what you're delegating, Malcolm countered. Can you explain why client satisfaction increased 12% last quarter? Victor tried. His explanation was vague, touching on improved communication and streamlined processes without identifying specific causes. Malcolm listened patiently, then produced another document. According to Stella's project notes, the improvement came from implementing automated follow-up protocols and restructuring the escalation workflow. She designed both systems, tested them, and deployed them. You were copied on the implementation email but never responded. The silence was brutal. 50 people watching a manager get systematically dismantled using evidence he couldn't dispute. Someone in the back row raised a tentative hand. Should we bring Stella in to explain the systems? It was Amanda from accounting, the same person who'd mouthed an apology earlier. Her voice was small, uncertain. Malcolm shook his head. She'll join us later. Right now, I want everyone here to understand how badly we've failed basic management principles. He looked around the room, making eye contact with multiple people. Stella wasn't invited to this meeting initially because I wanted to see who actually understood the operations they claim to manage. The answer is disturbingly few of you. He picked up another set of documents. Over the next hour, we're going to discuss organizational changes. Some roles are being eliminated. Others are being created or redefined. The people leaving knew exactly who they were when they walked in here, even if they hoped otherwise. Harrison Kemp stood abruptly. I think there's been a misunderstanding about my contributions. Malcolm's expression didn't change. You billed 40 hours to the Riverside project last month. The project lead has no record of your involvement. When asked, they said you attended one meeting and contributed nothing substantive. That's billing fraud. Harrison sat down slowly, his face ashen. Anyone else want to contest their assessment? Malcolm asked calmly. Nobody moved. Malcolm pressed a button on the conference table, and the door opened. 2 people from HR entered, carrying folders. Harrison Kemp and Preston Walsh, you'll be coming with HR now to discuss transition arrangements. Harrison stood mechanically, looking stunned. Preston, a manager I'd rarely interacted with, followed with resignation heavy in his posture. They'd known this was possible, but expecting termination and experiencing it were different. The door closed behind them, and the remaining attendees shifted uncomfortably. 2 senior people removed in the first 15 minutes. Who was next? Malcolm let the silence stretch, allowing anxiety to build. 4 more people will be leaving today, he said finally. I'm not announcing names publicly. HR will meet with you individually. You know who you are. Around the room, faces tightened. People doing mental calculations, reviewing their recent contributions, wondering if they'd done enough to survive. The rest of you will receive new role definitions reflecting actual responsibilities. Some promotions, some lateral moves, some reductions in scope and compensation. Malcolm paused. This isn't punishment for most of you. It's correction. We built a culture where visibility mattered more than competence. That changes now. He gestured to the HR representatives. You'll each have individual meetings this week to discuss your new arrangements. Go back to your desks. This meeting is concluded. The dismantling of Victor's narrative was subtle but complete. As people filed out, Malcolm called him back. Victor, stay please. Through the glass, I watched my manager return to his seat while the room emptied. Malcolm sat across from him, the body language shifting from public presentation to private confrontation. Malcolm spoke quietly, too low for me to hear. But I saw Victor's responses, the defensive gestures, the attempts to explain or justify. Malcolm remained calm, unmoved by whatever arguments were being presented. He opened a folder, spreading documents across the table. Even from a distance, I recognized them. My project documentation. My system designs. My email trails showing requests for direction that went unanswered. Malcolm was using my own meticulous record-keeping to demonstrate exactly how much work Victor had claimed versus how much he'd actually done. The evidence was damning because I'd never intended it as evidence. I'd just documented everything as standard professional practice, creating paper trails that now revealed patterns of credit theft. Victor's shoulders slumped as he reviewed the documents. No defense was adequate against written proof. Malcolm spoke again, his tone final. Victor nodded slowly, standing to leave. His face was grey, expression defeated. He didn't look toward where I stood watching. Just walked out. The office filled slowly as people emerged from the conference room. The atmosphere had completely transformed from 2 hours earlier. Nobody made eye contact. Conversations were muted, shock still settling in. People returned to desks mechanically, processing what had happened. Amanda approached my desk hesitantly. Stella, I'm sorry about earlier. I thought you were being let go. Her voice was subdued, apologetic. Everyone did. I shrugged, unsure how to respond. It's okay. I thought so too. What Malcolm said in there, about your work, she continued. We had no idea. You never said anything. I didn't think I needed to, I replied honestly. The work spoke for itself. She nodded, then glanced around nervously. Victor's clearing out his office. Security is with him. My stomach twisted at the confirmation. Fired. Victor had been terminated while I'd watched through glass walls. The reversal was dizzying. This morning I'd thought I was done. Now my manager was packing boxes, and Malcolm had used my documentation to expose practices I'd simply accepted as normal corporate dynamics. Do you know what happens next? Amanda asked. For the rest of us? No idea, I admitted. Before Amanda could respond, my computer pinged with a new message. Stella, can you come to the executive floor? Malcolm would like to speak with you. Claudia, executive assistant, the timing was immediate, urgent. Now they wanted me. After everyone else had learned their fate, they were ready to discuss mine. The executive floor felt different from operations. Quieter, more polished. Expensive art on walls, actual offices instead of cubicles. Claudia greeted me with a warm smile that felt genuine rather than performative. Malcolm is ready for you. Conference room at the end. My heart pounded as I walked down the hallway. The room at the end had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Malcolm sat at a small round table, considerably less formal than the massive conference table where he'd addressed the company earlier. Stella, thank you for coming up. He gestured to a chair. I imagine today has been confusing. That's an understatement, I replied, sitting carefully. Malcolm smiled slightly. I apologize for the way this unfolded. You weren't included in the meeting intentionally, but I realize how that must have felt. Like I was being fired, I said bluntly. Understandable conclusion, Malcolm acknowledged. The reality is the opposite. You're one of very few people here who actually deserve their position, possibly more. He opened a folder, pulling out organizational charts. I've been planning this restructuring for 2 months. Started when a client specifically requested you for a project, and I realized I had no idea who you were despite your 6 years here. The admission was surprisingly direct. Malcolm slid the organizational chart across the table. I'm creating a new role, Director of Operations Systems. It reports directly to me, oversees integration infrastructure, client data management, and process improvement. Salary range is 95 to 115,000, depending on experience. He looked at me steadily. I'm offering you this position. The number made me dizzy. I currently made 58,000. This was nearly double. That's a significant jump, I managed. It reflects the work you're already doing, Malcolm replied. Victor was making 92,000 to supervise you and take credit for your output. You'll be making more because you're eliminating the unnecessary management layer. He paused. The role comes with 2 direct reports, budget authority for system improvements, and visibility to executive leadership. No more hiding behind coordinators and managers. It was everything I'd never dared ask for. Recognition, compensation, authority. But something made me hesitate. Why now? I asked. Why restructure this way? Malcolm leaned back, considering his answer. Because I built a company that rewarded performance theater over actual performance. That's my failure. Fixing it means promoting people like you and removing people like Victor. He met my eyes. You've earned this 3 times over. The question is whether you want it. I didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, and Malcolm didn't rush me. This was the inflection point of my entire career. Accept, and everything changed. Title, compensation, visibility, authority. Decline, and I'd remain where I was, though Victor's absence would alter dynamics regardless. What happened to Victor? I asked finally. Malcolm's expression hardened slightly. Terminated for misrepresenting his contributions. He claimed responsibility for projects you completed, billed time to work you did, and failed basic competency questions about systems he supposedly managed. He paused. I don't terminate people lightly, but the evidence was clear. My documentation, I said. Yes. You keep excellent records. That helped considerably in determining actual contributions versus claimed ones. He pulled out another document. This is your project log from the past year. 43 separate initiatives, ranging from minor improvements to complete system overhauls. Victor claimed credit for 17 of them in management reports. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised me, but seeing it quantified was still jarring. Will his replacement know what I actually do? I asked. There's no replacement. That's the point. Malcolm gestured to the org chart. You'll report to me. No intermediary claiming credit, No management layer that adds nothing but communication delays. It was tempting. Dangerously so. But I'd learned caution. I have conditions, I said carefully. Malcolm nodded, unsurprised. I expected you might. What do you need? First, public acknowledgement of the role change. Announcement to the company explaining the new position and who's filling it. No quiet transition. Malcolm made a note. Agreed. What else? Second, clarity on decision-making authority. I want written documentation of what I can approve independently versus what requires your sign-off. Reasonable, Malcolm replied. We'll draft scope documents as part of the role definition. Third, I continued, protection from retaliation. People are going to resent my promotion after today's meeting. I need assurance that complaints will be evaluated fairly, not used to undermine me. Malcolm's expression grew serious. That's a legitimate concern. I'll address it in the company announcement. Anyone attempting retaliation will face immediate consequences. He paused. What else? Finally, 6-month review. If this isn't working for either of us, we reassess without prejudice. I don't want to be locked into something that becomes untenable. Malcolm extended his hand. Those terms are acceptable. Do you accept the position? I shook his hand firmly. Yes, I accept. Relief and anxiety flooded through me simultaneously. Everything had changed in one afternoon. The person who'd been invisible that morning was now a director reporting to the CEO. Walking back to operations felt surreal. The space looked the same, but everything had shifted fundamentally. Victor's office stood empty, his belongings already removed. Security had been efficient. His name placard was gone from the door. The space waited for whatever came next. My desk still held the notebook where I'd documented my responsibilities, planning for termination that never came. The pages looked different now, not a farewell record but proof of everything I'd been quietly carrying. People glanced at me as I passed, expressions ranging from curiosity to resentment. Word had spread quickly about the promotions and terminations. Nobody knew quite how to react to someone who jumped from coordinator to director in a single afternoon. Amanda approached tentatively. Is it true? You're the new director? Yes, I confirmed simply. Malcolm offered me the operations systems role. She studied me carefully. You know people are going to say you didn't earn it. That Malcolm promoted you to make a point. People can say whatever they want, I replied calmly. I know what I've contributed. So does Malcolm. That's what matters. It was true. I'd spent 6 years proving myself to people who never noticed. I was done performing for approval I'd never receive. Let them talk. Let them resent. The work would speak louder than gossip. 3 weeks later, I passed the conference room where everything had changed. The space looked ordinary now, just glass walls and empty chairs. But I remembered standing outside those walls, watching my manager crumble under questions he couldn't answer. Remembered the moment I understood I wasn't the expendable one. The new role had its challenges. Building a team, establishing credibility with skeptical colleagues, managing increased visibility. But I'd also implemented improvements that were already showing results. 2 new hires to share system responsibilities. Automated reporting that freed up hours of manual work. Direct communication with clients who'd been requesting my involvement for years. Malcolm had kept his promises. The company announcement had been clear and public, outlining my background and why the role was created. Anyone who questioned my credentials could review the documented projects that justified the promotion. Yesterday, a coordinator had approached me nervously, asking for career advice. She'd been with the company 3 years, doing strong work nobody noticed. Should I look elsewhere? She'd asked. Or wait for recognition here? I'd thought carefully before answering. Document everything you do. Every project, every contribution, every success. Not for recognition necessarily, but for yourself. So you know your worth even if nobody else sees it yet. She'd nodded, understanding. Sometimes they exclude you because they think you're expendable. Let them. Quiet competence doesn't need an invitation. It just needs time and someone willing to actually look at what you do. Eventually, the gap between perception and reality becomes too obvious to ignore. And when that moment comes, you'd better have proof ready.